If you were asked about our critical energy resources, which would come to mind? Electricity, fossil fuels, maybe wind and hydro. But does food pop in your mind? I'd say not often enough. Especially in our discussions about sustainability and energy efficiency, I think food as an energy source is underrepresented. Also, it's important to note that it takes 10 calories of fossil fuels to produce each calorie of our United States diet. Clearly, there's a lot of room for improvement and literacy in this area. My name's Carla Ramsdell, and I teach in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at Appalachian State University. I came into higher education as a second career. I started as an engineer in the energy sector, and perhaps it's through this perspective that I see food as such a critical energy resource. And it's through teaching college students for many years that I've come to realize that these college years are super important to talk to students about food. Because often in college is the first time students have a kitchen of their own. So they get to make the decision, am I going to use that room? Or am I going to rely on a highly processed and packaged food system? And I believe these decisions form the basis for their personal food system decisions for a long time to come. So while many people have charted our path to a sustainable food future, most of these strategies rely on us re-embracing home cooking. So now, while teaching physics of energy and other related topics, I have infused food more and more as an energy resource. In doing so, I've kind of become a bit of a cooking evangelist. I encourage students to take control of their food system by learning some simple home cooking skills. This doesn't have to be elaborate or fussy. And I think what they learn is that cooking is really grounding and has multiple psychological benefits also. Look at what has happened to us during our COVID-19 stay-at-home orders. People have moved back in the kitchen, they're making sourdough and recipes that are from their cultural heritage. This, I believe, is one of the huge benefits and shows how important cooking is to our species. There are many ways we can teach about the importance of home cooking. For one, we can talk about the benefits of a robust local food system with minimal transportation, energy, and packaging. It's hard to embrace local food if you can't cook. Also, we can talk about the importance of their food decision. For example, if they're going to make a taco, should they choose a beef taco or maybe consider some plant-based protein? If you see on this chart from the Environmental Working Group, beef is all the way over on one side of the curve, right? That shows very high equivalent carbon dioxide emissions. We see lentils are all the way on the other end of the curve. I noticed that some students in my class, when I start talking about lentils, don't even know what they are. You know, they ask me, what does a lentil look like? So in class, we cook lentil tacos, and they can see that if you just undercook a lentil a little bit, it still has a bit of a chew, and it can be a really great ground beef equivalent. Then, while we're enjoying those delicious tacos, we can do a bit of a cost analysis on the savings of cooking with these lentils rather than their beef equivalent. And I think this is a great strategy for helping to alleviate some of the food insecurity issues that we have on college campuses and beyond. And then obviously we can also address the health advantages of shifting some, at least, of our food choices to plant proteins. Also, I really think that teaching the thermodynamics of cooking allows students to learn physics through a topic that's fun and approachable. So for example, I asked students in advance to bring a travel coffee mug with them to class. And then I purchase some pasta and bring along some salt. And I have water boilers set up around the classroom. And so when they come in, they count out a certain amount of the spaghetti and break it in half and drop it down into their coffee mug, add a little bit of salt, and then they fill it up with boiling water, cap off their mug, and wait about 10 minutes. So while we're waiting for this pasta to passively cook, I can explain to them that the reason this is possible with water is because of the high specific heat of water. It's very thermally sluggish, which means that it takes a lot of energy before it increases in temperature. But once we get it to that elevated temperature, it's very thermally resilient. It'll take a really long time to drop. And so it can cook in your mug for those 10 minutes with very minimal drop in temperature. After 10 minutes or so, we drain the water out of the pasta and we dump it into a bowl, and then we can make a really simple sauce. Maybe just take a tomato and grate it, add a little garlic and olive oil. It's no packaging sauce that they could make even in their dorm room. So this gives them some basic cooking skills. But I think the advantage of this is that we have now some newfound physics knowledge that I can apply to other topics. For example, I always show them this curve of our carbon dioxide atmospheric concentrations over the last 800,000 years. So for one, this tells a really important story. If we look at the blue line, that's the carbon dioxide concentration. That where we are today, over 400 parts per million, is in no way in line with any sort of historical cycles we've seen in the last 800,000 years. But additionally, if you look at the red line, which shows the average surface temperature, we see how closely it tracks carbon dioxide, right? And then once students have a chance to analyze it and discuss this graph, the question I always get is, why is it that our current temperature isn't up there with that elevated carbon dioxide emissions? And I can always go back to the knowledge that we learned from cooking pasta passively and say, you know, water's very high specific heat means it's thermally sluggish, and so it doesn't increase in temperature very quickly. And since most of our surface of our Earth is water, it hasn't had a chance to respond to this new incoming radiation yet. So I just wanted to share with you quickly a couple of the things that I've done on our campus to help to infuse this food and energy theme. So one is that I teach a first-year seminar course called No Watt Cooking, and so it's all about the physics of energy efficient cooking. This class is great because it's a small class size. It's also really flexible. It's not a prerequisite to anything else, and so as such, I let the students dictate each semester what they'd really like to learn. And so we're going to do some core physics, but what we're going to cook in our cooking labs, maybe the field trips we go on, are going to be determined by the students, and I think that helps to, you know, really heighten their engagement since they chose the topics. This year we went to the research farm on our campus, and students became, you know, really in touch with their food system much more so than they would have been. And I think getting this strong sustainability message this early in their college career is really important. Another class where I infuse some food thermodynamics, especially, is in this course I teach. It's a general education course on the physics of energy and sustainability. I think the advantage here is that I tend to reach a non-foodie audience. Some of these other classes I teach that have food in the name tend to attract people who are already really passionate about food. Since this course is predominantly about renewable energy and transportation and building science, it brings in a different group of people, which is really important. In 2019, I had the chance to take a group of those students to Florence, Italy to study the food system there. And so I think by being immersed in this culture where food sustainability is so deeply woven into so many of their decisions was really impactful for myself and many of my students. I also teach an upper level physics course called the Physics of Food and Cooking. And in this class, we're able to go deeper into the physics and the calculation, which is really fun. These are images, infrared images of different solar ovens that we study in this class. It's only offered in the summer, and so that means it's a pretty small class size. This past summer, we had to transition to an all online format, which I wasn't really looking forward to. But I had each of the students buy some basic cooking laboratory equipment, such as some different kinds of thermometers and also cooking surfaces that could be plugged into an energy meter, like a kilowatt meter. And I let them choose the kind of burner they wanted, from electric resistance to a radiant burner to an induction cooktop. And then we did these online live cooking classes that ended up being really fantastic experience. Everybody took data as we were all cooking the same thing, and then uploaded the data and charted it and compared it to each other. So we learned a whole lot about the different equipment we had and different methods we were using. For one, everybody that had the induction cooktops, energy was always strikingly lower than the rest of the class. We ended this class with the final exam that was the great physics bake-off, where part of the final exam was for them to grab a recipe and change it related to how some of the tricks that they learned in the class, and some of the cookware choices or recipe ingredient trade outs. So I think we had a lot of fun showing each other what we'd learned through that experience. Another example of something we've done outside of the classroom on Appalachian State's campus is something called Community Feast. And this is where once a year we gather around a 100-yard long table of simple local food. We order baked potatoes and apple pie made from local apples. And so we can discuss around this table the importance of sourcing of our food, of minimizing our waste. We actually have student groups sign up to help host tables by providing potato toppers. And so this opens up a dialogue also for how we can talk about the most efficient way to get those ingredients and how to locally source those. So these are just a few examples. I think I see a lot of other opportunities on college campuses where we can do this type of work. There's a lot of other classes such as chemistry or nutrition or sustainable development courses. Perhaps if on campuses we had more spaces that allowed for student cooking and cooking classes. Also food pantries, maybe classes specifically for our food insecure students to teach them how to cook with inexpensive ingredients. I've heard of cafeterias where students purchase the raw ingredients and then cook it themselves on cook stoves that are available to them. Also, there's a lot of kitchens and dorms, but rarely are there sufficient tools there. So some kind of checkout process where students can get the pots and pans and spoons that they need to start experimenting in this way. So thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I'd love for you to reach out and discuss things that you've done on your campuses. This is a website above me, No Watts Cooking, where you can show students some ideas of how to cook simply and low energy. Thanks so much. I hope you have a great day.